Hi friends, this is Sarvajan here. Welcome to my networking channel. Hope all are doing good. And today the topic I am going to discuss about how to configure IBGP using IPv6 in a Fortigate firewall. So as per the architecture, I connected three Fortigate firewall, port 1, 2 and 3. So firewall 1 and 2 is connected by a physical port 1 and firewall 2 and 3 are connected by physical port 2. So these two interfaces will be in the same subnet 2001:111 and these two interfaces will be in the same subnet, that is 2002:111. Okay, so that's the only difference. So what I'm going to do, first I'm going to configure all these directly connected interfaces with the IPv6 address. Then I need to create a policy for allowing from port 1 to port 2 and for port 2 to port 1 communication. So I was just like a bidirectional communication. I have to create two policies in firewall 2. For that, what I have done, I have enabled the GUI configuration. So through GUI, I'm going to show you how to configure a firewall policy for IPv6. So that I'm going to show you today how to configure through GUI. Okay. And the third thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure the BGP for IPv6, IBGP using IPv6. So all these interfaces or all this firewall I'm going to configure in autonomous system number 1. Okay, since it's an IBGP using IPv6, I'm going to show you all this particular firewall I'm going to configure using IBGP in autonomous system number 1. Okay, so that's the only thing I'm going to do. So first let us quickly configure all these directly connected interfaces with the IPv6 address, and for that I have written a basic script, okay, in a notepad. So the command for configuring IPv6 is config system interface and go to the corresponding port. So this is port 1. So edit port 1, and for configuring IPv6 the syntax is config IPv6 set IP6 address followed by the IPv6 address what I'm going to assign. Then I'm going to allow the ping communication for this corresponding address. Okay, so let us copy this and let us paste it on the first firewall CLI. Okay, so just log in and paste it on the first firewall. So this is the IP I'm going to assign on. Okay, so show system interface port 1, and let us do a ping for this particular IPv6 address, ping 6 followed by this address. So I'm able to reach, and also now the similar way I'm going to configure the two interfaces. This interface port 1 and this IPv6 address in port 2. Okay, so let us go to the notepad and edit port 1, and the IP will be :2. Okay, so just copy this and paste it on the second firewall. So this is for port 1 IPv6 address. Okay, and similar way for the port 2 it is 2002:111:1. Okay, so now let us edit the port detail. So port is port 2 and IP6 address 2002 lost is 1. Okay, so just copy this and paste it on the second firewall, that is for port 2. So now let us view the port 1 and the port 2 configuration for the firewall 2. So the port 1 configuration is 2001:2 and port 2 is 2002. Okay, so this is the address. So now let us ping these two addresses. 2001:1111:1 I am able to reach, and also the second interface. So that also I'm able to reach. So similar way, let us go to the third firewall and I'm going to configure this port 2 with this IPv6 address. So I'm going to edit only this IPv6 address now. Already it is in port 2. So this will save the time. Okay, so just copy it, and also we can execute via some other script also. I will show in the coming video. So we can configure via netmiko or ansible. So config system interface, edit port 2. Okay, so just copy this and paste it on the third firewall. Just log in on the third firewall also are done. So now let us ping this remote interface from the firewall 3 and the firewall 1. Okay, so execute ping 6 and the remote interface is 1. Okay, so I'm able to ping, and also from the firewall 1 let us ping this remote interface. Okay, so execute ping 6 followed by this particular remote interface, that is 2. So I'm able to reach. So now the second step is I'm going to configure the policy prior to the IBGP configuration. Let us create a IPv6 firewall policy. So since it is for IPv6, so I have to configure the firewall policy also for IPv6. I'm going to show how to do that through GUI. For that, this port 3, I enable the IP. So the IP is 192.168.84.50. Okay, let us go to the firewall 2. Show system interface port 3. So this is the IP I have done 84.50, and I enable the HTTP and HTTP access for accessing the GUI of the firewall 2. Okay, so this is a firewall 2, and let us log in admin and followed by the password. So now what I'm going to do is, let us go directly to the, so first I need to enable the IP version 6 for this firewall 2. Okay, how to do that? Because if we directly go to the policy, right? Let us go to the policy and objects. So it will be there only the IPv4 policy I'm showing, right? So I need to configure a IP version 6 policy. So for that, how to enable is, go to system, okay, go to the feature visibility, and here I have to enable the IP version 6 and just apply the configuration. So after doing this, now you can see the IP version 6 policy. Go to the policy and objects. Now you are able to see the IP version 6 policy, right? So just click the IP version 6 policy, and I'm going to create two rules from port 1 to port 2, and the second rule from port 2 to port 1 communication. Okay, so just because by default there will be an implicit deny policy will be there, just create new. Let us add the rule as rule 1, incoming interface port 1 to port 2. Okay, so this is port 1 to port 2. Okay, so port 1 to port 2, source is all, destination is also all, and the service should be all. Just click OK. And the second rule is from port 2 to port 1. Okay, then we will use the policy via CLI. So the second rule is from port 2 to port 1. So rule 2, so just port 2 to port 1. Source address should be all, destination address can be all, and also the service can be all. Just click OK and save the configuration. Okay, so now let us view the two policies what we have created via CLI. So go to the firewall 2. So the command is show firewall policy. Policy is for IP version 4. Policy 6 is for IP version 6. So already we have successfully created two policy from port 2 to port 1 and port 1 to port 2. This is mainly for communication between these entire different subnets. Okay, so you are able to see the source interface port 1 to port 2, and the second rule for port 2 to port 1 communication. So now you are done with the configuration for the policy. So now let us do a ping from this firewall 1 to this remote interface. Let us do a ping. Okay, so execute ping 6 2002. So this ping 6 2002 colon 11222, sorry, it is 1111 colon 1. So still it is not reachable. Why? Because I have to enable IBGP on all these particular interfaces using IP version 6. So okay, let us go ahead and configure the IBGP neighbor relationship. Okay, so let us go to the first firewall, and the command is config router BGP. Okay, and now let us go to the router ID. Set router ID, let us set it as 1.1.1, and I'm going to configure the IBGP relationship. Okay, so now you have to configure the neighbor, just like an IP version 6 configure the neighbor, then go to edit the neighbor statement. So you have to edit the IPv6 address. What is the neighbor is 2001 colon 2, right? So 2001 colon 1111 colon 2. Okay, now what we have to do is we have to set the values. Okay, set interface, which interface is port 1. Okay, so this I'm going to enable for port 1, so I'm giving port 1. So the port 1, the neighbor is enabled. So now let us come out of this configuration. So it is showing the remote AS value. So we have to also set the remote AS, because in BGP you have to configure the local and the remote AS. So let us go to the set AS1, then let us go to the same thing, config neighbor. Okay, so go to the corresponding thing, edit, then we have to set the remote autonomous system. So the remote AS is also one citizen IBGP, and set interface port 1. Okay, so now let us come out of the configuration. So one more thing is pending. I'm going to advertise this prefix. So for that, since it's an IPv6, what you do is config network 6. Okay, since it's an IP version 6 and edit 1. So I'm adding the first entry. Now let us advertise the prefix as set prefix 6 2001 colon 111 colon slash 64. And now let us save the configuration, and now let us view the configuration. Show router BGP. So okay, so this is a configuration. Local AS is 1 and the router ID is 1.1.1 and the neighbor is this neighbor. Okay, and the neighbor is in remote autonomous system number is also 1, so it is an IBGP. Then we have advertised the prefix via network 6. So this is a local prefix you advertise. Okay, so we are done with the firewall 1 configuration. Similar way for firewall 2 also let us configure. So go to config BGP, config router BGP, set the router ID as 2.2.2 and set the local AS is again 1. Okay. So now let us go to the neighbor statement. Config neighbor and edit 2001. It has two neighbor, right? So it has two IBGP neighbor. One is Fort firewall 1 and firewall 3 also. So edit neighbor 111 colon 1. Okay. And now set the remote autonomous system. Remote AS is again 1 and set interface for this is port 1. Okay. So now let us go to next. So next is the next neighbor is this neighbor. This particular neighbor I'm going to configure. Okay. So the neighbor is edit 2002 colon 1111 colon it is 2. Okay, so it is 2. Then set the remote autonomous system. So after neighbor, the two fields are mandatory. One is remote autonomous system and the interface. Remote is again 1 and set interface is port 2. So since this is port 2, we have to set the interface as port 2, right? So now let us save the configuration and now let us advertise the prefix. So since it has two prefix, right? 2001 colon 111 and 2002 colon 111. These are the prefix. So now let us go to the edit one. The first prefix is set prefix 6 2001 colon 1111 colon slash 64. Then go to next. I'm adding the next prefix. Okay. So let us edit the second entry. Second entry I'm making set prefix 6 2002 colon 1111 colon slash 64. So we have done with the configuration. So now let us view the configuration for the second firewall. Since the second firewall has two prefix and two neighbors, IBGP neighbor, I have configured in such a way. Show router BGP. Okay. So this has two neighbors, 2001 colon 1, which is in port 1, AS1, and another is 2002 colon 2. Okay. So let us check the neighbor also. We have configured correctly. Okay. Otherwise, the neighbor relationship will not get established. Okay. So we are done with the configuration and also advertise two prefixes. So now let us go to the third firewall and let us configure. It has only one neighbor, IBGP neighbor. So let us configure from the third firewall also. Okay. So just log in. So the command is config router BGP, then set the router ID. Router ID is again 3.3.3. Set the local AS as 1 and go to edit neighbor. Okay, go to the config neighbor and edit the neighbor statement. What is the neighbor is 2002 colon 111, right? So 2002 colon 111 colon 1. Now set the remote autonomous system as again 1, so it is an IBGP, and set the interface as port 2. Since we are enabled for port 2, okay, now let us save the configuration. Now let us advertise the prefix. So it has only one prefix, that is this prefix 2002. So edit 1, make a first entry and advertise the prefix. Prefix 6 2002 colon 1111 slash 64. So we have successfully advertised the prefix. I hope you are following what are things I am configuring. So now let us do show router BGP. Okay. So what are things we have done is it's like a normal Cisco BGP. We have configured the first we have configured the local AS and the remote AS. Then we have configured the neighbor. Then we have advertised the network. So these are three things we have done. Router BGP, set AS, router ID, Then I configured the neighbor. This is a neighbor, right? This is a neighbor we did. So then we have set the neighbor also in the same autonomous system since it's an IBGP. Then I advertise the prefix via config network 6. So this is the thing. So only thing is you have to understand the syntax in a FortiGate firewall. So then it will be easy. Okay, so done with the configuration. So now let us check the BGP summary on all the things. Okay, so execute. So it is like get router info 6 since it's a IP version 6 info 6 BGP summary. So that means already it is established. Let us go to the second neighbor. The command is get router info 6 BGP summary. So it's already established. It has two neighbors. It's successfully established. So now we need to check the advertised networks. That's the only thing pending. Okay, it's already established. So now let us check the prefix. So port 1 should also learn this particular network. Port 3 should learn this remote network. That is our aim, right? So get router info 6 BGP network. Okay, so that means it already learned the remote network. So you're able to see it already learned the remote network via this next drop statement. So these are the default attributes value. Metric is 0, local preference is 100. Also let us check from the firewall 3. So the command is get router info 6 BGP network. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, just I'm going to do a ping from the firewall 1 to this remote interface. Okay, so then we are good with the configuration. Execute ping 6. So this is the thing. 1 I'm able to reach, and also the remote interface 2 also I'm able to reach. And also let us check from the, I hope you are following this, from the firewall 3 let us ping this remote interface. Go to firewall 3, execute ping 6 and the remote interface. 2001 is the remote interface from the firewall 3. So 1. So I'm able to reach, right? And also there's another command also we can check is go to execute, sorry, it is like get router info. Okay, so get router info 6 routing table. You can do like this also. So it will show B is nothing but a BGP, and this is a remote network, and this is an AD, and also the next hop attribute and the port. Okay, so you can do like this also. Let us check from firewall 3. So get router info 6 routing table. So that's all about this configuration. What are things we have done is, first we have configured the directly interfaces, configure interfaces with the IP version 6 address. So first we have configured the directly interfaces with the IPv6 address. Then the second is we have created the policy for allowing from the port 1 to port 2 and the port 2 to port 1 communication. And third thing, we have configured the IBGP version using IP version 6. So these are three things I have done. So the command you have to keep it in mind is, for viewing the routing table, it is get router info 6 BGP routing table, or I can do get router info 6 routing table, or get router info 6 BGP summary for viewing the neighbor relationship, for BGP network for viewing the BGP routing table. Okay, so that's all about this video, and I hope you enjoy this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more videos. Thanks and have a wonderful day. Thank you.